If your son or daughter were raising around, what would you tell them to watch out for that most CEO founders miss? I'm really excited to have Doug Song on with me today. He's been someone that I've known for a while, gotten to work next to, and really learned a lot from. And I think that our listeners today are going to enjoy and learn a lot from Doug as well. Doug co founded Duo Security and grew it from an Ann Arbor startup into Michigan's first tech unicorn, raising over $120 million from world class investors like Lead Edge Capital, Benchmark, Google Ventures, and Redpoint before they were acquired by Cisco for $2.35 billion. Along the way, Doug has proved you can scale on values like simplicity, empathy, and integrity without leaving your community behind. Named one of Forbes' most powerful entrepreneurs, Doug is as committed to building communities as he is companies. Through the Song Foundation, Michigan Founders Fund, and dozens of local and national initiatives. Today, he brings his perspective both as a founder, as a CEO, and as an investor, and will really help us explore how to build companies that grow fast, stay true to their mission, and raise the right kind of capital. So, Doug, thank you for being on with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, good to see you again, Kirk.
Yeah, likewise, likewise. We have lots to catch up on. Well, so let's jump in. As I said earlier, you co-founded Duo with Jono, and built an incredible team. I mean, it was just electric. Just walking into the offices, you could just feel the energy that was there. And you built it in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I know that there was, that even as your journey in raising money, and maybe you'll talk a little bit about that, how maybe some people even push back on, can you really do this in Ann Arbor? But my first question is really, if one of your kids, and I know how much you love your kids, or a family member came to you and said, hey, Doug, what's the most important principle about raising the right kind of capital? What would you tell them?
Mm. Well, the color of everyone's money is green, and so the kind of capital I think is really tied to the kind of person, right, that you're partnering with. And so for a lot of founders, and they say the same thing. My kids, I mean, maybe if you have a traditional banking relationship, right, with a banker, maybe it's a little more transactional, arm's length, and so forth. But for an investor, an equity investor in your company, you're basically getting married for a decade, right? Something like that. And so it's actually my lead director, who I had, Lori Norrington, who had like a really nice name for this. She used to call it the grocery store test. If you found this investor in a grocery store, would you run up to them, want to talk to them because you love talking to them so much, or would you hide out from them in the other aisle? Um, because ultimately, it is more like a marriage
Yeah.
than a transaction. And you're not looking for sort of a trophy spouse. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes people do a lot of that,
Yeah.
but
That's a great way of putting it.
yeah. But personally, I mean, the firm can certainly be important, but it is so much more about, I think, the partner, um,
Mhm.
especially if that's an investor that ends up with a board seat or so forth. But yeah,
Yeah.
but focus on the partner as much as the firm, and to make sure it's someone that you really enjoy spending time with, want to spend time with, and find helpful to you, right, in the ways that a real partner can be.
Yeah, I really appreciate the grocery store. I remember Lori sharing that. And I've actually shared that with other CEOs. That is a great kind of litmus test to kind of test that. When you are looking at that, and that example, Mitchell Green and others that have been on this have used that exact example, that it is like a marriage. How do you think about, like, really kind of getting in and learning about that partner? Is there are there things that you did, or lessons that you learned you wish you would have done?
Yeah, there's only one truth in life or in business, I really think there is, when it comes to kind of feeling out and getting to understand people early, and that's actually blind references. It's
Yeah.
very hard to
Uh-huh.
get to know somebody or spend as much time with them as all the people in their lives prior have. And so if you can get to those people, the other
Mhm.
CEOs that they've invested in, or even more interestingly, sometimes if you can get to the people that they've raised from, uh, I do think that there's a lot to be learned from the folks that surround, the
Yeah.
person that you're looking at. And for many, to be honest with you, for many investors, it's sort of a litmus test anyway, whether you can get a warm intro right through their network
Hmm.
in a sort of similar fashion. And so, yeah, to the extent possible, diligence those investors through other founders. And I'd say most founders, actually, if they've taken money from an investor and have another credible founder approaching them for, you know, a reference or some questions about whether that's a relationship that's been positive or not, they'll almost always take those calls privately. And if they
Yeah.
don't, sometimes the signal in
Yeah.
and of itself.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. When I was talking to Mitchell and he referenced you and he had some very positive things. He told a story about how when he showed up at your, I think it was your office with like a clearinghouse size check. But he was talking about how it's so important to maybe even really talk to people that where things didn't go well, where they didn't end
Mhm.
up with the outcome that they wanted and hear how they got treated in that part of the journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I think in any interview, right, you would do, you'll follow up on references and so forth. But it's always surprising to me the degree to which sometimes founders, um, I don't know, they really get sort of sold into sort of deals and partnerships with firms that they probably do need to be testing a little bit more.
Yeah. How did you think about the journey of just raising capital? Obviously,
Mhm.
when there was a time is when, the firm needed that and stuff like that, but you guys were in a growth trajectory. But how did you think about this is the right time for us to be raising capital and we're going to be able to actually deploy it in a responsible way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I tell founders, don't overraise. Actually, it's always difficult to raise. Period. Right? It's always a tremendous amount of time, and for first time founders, can take 6 months, I think, on average, sometimes, right, for folks to
Hmm.
really get a round done. So, so you have to pace yourself. But I also, there's the other side of it, which is that once you are successful, kind of pulling together a round in investors, it's very tempting to sort of raise a lot more than you need, or in terms that um, you set a much higher bar for the company than maybe you might be able to meet. I think certainly during the bubble of the zero interest rate sort of
Yeah.
boom,
Uh-huh.
maybe 2020, 2021, and so forth, where you had just hundreds and hundreds of companies end up raising on terms that were really not justified by the fundamentals. And we see it now, right, with all these hundreds of unicorns that are now overvalued and deflating. Um,
Yes.
there is such a thing as getting a bit over your skis that way. And so I tell founders, always right size, the amount of capital you're raising for the stage of the company and for what you're about to do next. Um, you were a bit lucky at Duo, or I don't know if lucky is the right word for it, but there's a point every year at which Duo was cash flow positive. And so we had the choice whether to lean in and raise more capital to accelerate and go faster, or to continue on the trajectory we were at, with the capital we had, and we're raising for really from customers, right? And
Uh-huh. Yeah.
so, which is the best kind of capital. you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
but I think if there's one thing I tell founders is maintain optionality.
Mhm.
That it's very easy to get sort of stuck one way or another, either unable to raise or having raised too much, such that you are in this sort of land of the walking dead. We can talk
Uh-huh.
about more of that later, but there's, like I say, right now we're sort of in a market full of zombie startups,
Yes.
um, and that's as bad a place to be, actually. Right?
Yeah,
In
yeah, yeah,
some
yeah.
cases.
Talk a little bit more about that because I think this is, and I see this a lot where,
Mm,
people raise a big round, they get these high valuations, the congratulations come in, but in a very simplistic way, it's kind of like, people calling congratulating you that you just took out a bigger mortgage on your house,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
how can someone that's listening think about that? Like, how do I not over raise?
Mm.
And how do I balance this between valuation, dilution, and making sure I'm with the right partner? Those are all kind of working together or against each other if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, the way I like to think about it is, I know, you know, generally speaking, right, in our startup community, we like to talk about finding investors that are founder friendly, right?
Nice.
But we've also kind of veered, frankly, into a world, particularly after I don't want to name any companies, but there are so
Yeah.
many now where the founders have been not just beneficiaries of friendly terms, but they've kind of almost held sort of their investors hostage, right, to
Yes.
sort of what they've been doing or wanted to do in this kind of bubble era of like free capital or prior.
Yeah.
And so I think for founders, constructively raising the right amount means trying to actually meet your expectations post money, maybe within 12 months, not 18 months or 24. Right? Everyone
Mhm.
talks about you raise for the next 24 months and of what you're going to do, or 18. But for me, as I talk with my old CFO Paul about all these things,
Uh-huh.
it's always about trying to meet that within 12 months. That just to keep the numbers easy, particularly if you're a SaaS company, on a traditional kind of 10x kind of you know revenue multiple, you want to grow into that
Uh-huh.
ARR to justify your post money within 12 months. And and it's very, very basic, the simplest kind of math to sort of work through, but it's also how you sort of literally beat the odds, right? And show that you're achieving sort of uncommon sort of velocity and valuation growth in the business,
Uh-huh.
um, for what you do next. Because after that round and after you've spent the money, you either need to be raising up or you need to
Yeah.
not need to raise money.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's,
Yeah. 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 No,
um,
that's really good. I've not heard somebody say kind of that 12-month mark to kind of think about how to really, deploying that capital and meeting up so you don't, like, say, get over your skis.
it's also horizon of planning that you can actually sort of navigate with your team. If you're talking about like 24 months, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
In startup land, it's 2 years out. It's hard to anyone to guess at. Um, but within 12 months, you can make concrete plans for what that looks like, and be assured that again, the capital you're taking, you're going to be in a justified place, right? 12 months
Mhm.
from now for having raised it. And so that's my guidance. Again,
Yeah.
it's not the popular thing maybe in a time where folks have always raised so much more money than they've ever needed. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and, and to be fair, your other question was about sort of like when the right time is to take the capital, right? Like I say, because we had that opportunity. We didn't, well, I should say we didn't need the money, strictly speaking, right? But we always found kind of the opportunity, right, to
Mhm.
go and take it on to go faster. Well, quite frankly, we're technically shy of 120 million raised. I think 119 million we ultimately raised. We only spent 14 of it to get to 100 million ARR, and
Yeah.
ultimately to get to 200 million, we spent less than 40. And so, you know, did we over raise? Maybe, but the later rounds were you know very uh, reasonable terms, right, for us to take
Yeah.
effective our mezzanine rounds en route to our IPO. And we were looking at some other larger strategic things that we would do with it, an acquisition or two
Mhm.
ahead of our IPO, that we would have done. And this is a scenario that I had talked with one of my other friends, Jeff Lawson, the CEO of Twilio, another set of Michigan founders who ended up building a pretty significant company.
Uh-huh.
At one
Yeah.
point, the hottest or sexiest stock in the world, apparently. He was on the cover of Forbes with that title. I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Um, but he had also tanked up about 100 million cash on the balance sheet as he was also looking to, tuck in a company or two, or really learn the process of uh, strategic growth through acquisition, but not strictly in the public eye, right? Building those muscles, getting that done first as a private company before he'd have
Mhm.
to um, do that as a public company. And so that
Mhm.
was really the goal for the later rounds we took that we didn't use, but we got acquired instead. But but sometimes investors can be preemptive about this. Certainly, our A to our B was a little bit that benchmark came
Uh,
calling. We didn't expect them, and um, found them pretty exciting.
uh,
Honestly, to consider working with. with a very different point of view on how to build businesses that we didn't think about. And then, Redpoint came in also preemptively, but these things all were sort of introductions from, our prior investors,
Uh,
uh, that had worked to, again, help, uh, continue to lever the company up with, more and more strategic capital. And so,
yeah, well, and I really appreciate what you're talking about. Then I want to pull out a couple key points, and there's several
mm,
there. One is just this horizon planning, and I say this genuinely and sincerely. You are one of the most humble, selfless leaders I've had the privilege of working with, and in that, I think it's really played in how you even raised capital, because I was, fortunate enough to be part of some of those conversations, how you kind of thought about those things, and you really did care about the team, the customers, the investors, and all of those people. And unfortunately, I've also seen where some leaders kind of look at the cap table. They kind of take it personally to look at it, what is it going to mean to them personally. And obviously, we're all looking at that some level, but they really make decisions from that standpoint. And it does hurt how capital gets raised and really how investors get taken care of. And so that's something that maybe doesn't get talked about enough, or maybe isn't there's not awareness about it. But I think oftentimes the leader in their team, how they're thinking about, what is this going to do to our own dilution, what is this going to do to, what's this mean to me, and then they make decisions from that standpoint versus for the betterment. And it's a subtle but significant difference I've seen.
no, no, I mean, again, we're in an era of, super voting shares for founders and all kind of things, and the founder secondary, which,
uh,
you know, look, I didn't do any, right, until,
yeah,
until, I didn't do any that the rest of my team couldn't do, right? I was never gonna do something that the rest of my team couldn't do, and, I think smart investors will always follow their founders, that their founders are selling shares, well, why should that investor hold, know,
yeah, yeah,
as well? And so, again, and there's always extenuating circumstances, right? Small things, right? And that's I'll never, say that a founder who needs a little bit of the edge taken off, right, in
yeah,
terms of,
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
but when
there's
I s
yeah.
but there have been founders who have raised massive rounds, multi-hundred-million-dollar rounds where the majority of the capital is taken up by the founders,
Hmm.
right? As their secondary, leaving, like, none of the I mean, not none, but, very little
Yeah.
of the raised capital to actually power the company, and that to me is just, like, incredibly selfish, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, no, I
And
agree, and I've and like I said, each circumstance is different, so we're not blanketing a judgment on that. But I've been able to sit at those and be part of those conversations and been like, this is not this is not for the health of the business, for the customer, for the investor. So I appreciate you kind of commenting on that, and this horizon planning, which kind of leads into part of my next question is,
mhm.
once you've raised the capital, what is it that you've seen the best teams do to kind of use that in a responsible way, and kind of what are the patterns of where you've seen how capital just gets wasted?
Yeah, yeah. Well, uh, when you grow too fast, so there is such a thing as growing too fast. For me, the thing, that again was the governing sort of, principle on that was we're not going to break the culture in the team, and that happens when you have sort of new hiring new. I remember
Mm,
some of our customers, actually, because we had a lot of big tech customers for Duo as well. Um, but some of these companies that were, hiring like 4,000 people in a year, right?
yeah,
When you have that degree of new hiring new layered, and,
yeah,
literally people don't know what they should be doing, I mean, it's very, very hard to, uh, execute well. And quite frankly, when I think about entrepreneurship in general, entrepreneurship, I think even the Harvard definition is, execution without all the resources needed.
yes,
And, I think, that's kind of the hallmark of the most successful and, you know, remarkable founders, is that they're endlessly creative about how they come up with, you know, uh, ideas and answers to problems that, you know, actually money sometimes really can't solve.
yeah,
And again, sometimes it just masks and aliases the problems, right, to something else. When you have so much money, you just don't know, kind of, like I say, half my marketing budget's effective. Problem is I don't know which half.
yeah,
It's just not a good place to be.
yeah,
And so a couple things on that materially that I think founders can do to make sure that you have some proper controls on things. One is obviously, all the stuff that you and I worked on ever in terms of how to actually manage executive team, develop them, and also ultimately hold them accountable, right, to the
Yes.
results.
Mhm.
And I do think a part of that in terms of compensation is, when we, for instance, we had MBOs just like most folks do for their
Uh,
directors and above, but their incentive comp was kind of three things, right, that were components. One was sort of our top line targets, right, and that we're
yeah.
beating our overall number. And that's how one way you could scale your bonus beyond 100%.
Uh,
The second was your MBO achievement,
yeah.
right?
And,
Are you
and,
getting the
and
things?
for people listening, give them what MBO stands for.
Oh, managing by objective.
Yeah.
Just means
Yeah.
your individualized goals. That
Yes.
again you've worked with your directs so that they're creating their own commitments, and you're just
Mhm.
holding them to them. But you've agreed that that's what's needed for the team's success moving forward. But the third is actually the one that everyone tends to sort of forget, which I think is really important. That it's actually a profitability goal. That you're doing that with uh, with the efficiency of a budget that you've also agreed to together. And that
Yes.
if you're because again, if you had all the research, all the money in the world to spend to achieve those goals at any cost, sure, everyone can get them done, right? It's one way or
Uh,
another. But
uh,
that's not the point. The point is that we have to actually get there with the resources we have and be thoughtful and creative. And it and if you do that, and it turns out that you end up with strategies that are much more defensible in the long term. Because in every area of dual success, whether sales, marketing, kind of customer success, engineering, product, and the rest, um, we ended up doing things slightly differently than what we'd seen
uh,
most of our competitors do, and maybe even most of our other tech companies do. Because we were constrained, we had to find the ways to do them, and we had to be thoughtful about what actually works. And we're
mhm.
constantly sort of evaluating and testing that versus just doing a thing that happens in big companies. We're like, oh well, this is the way we've always done it, or hey, this is how I did it in my last company, or this is
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's just that kind of lazy thinking is what ends up with bloated results.
Yeah. I want to repeat what you just said. That kind of lazy thinking ends up with bloated results. And one of the things that you guys and I've talked about this in early episodes of this podcast about there's kind of three things that that I think investors and people are kind of looking at. One is you've got the thesis, and the thesis is not your mission or your vision or your values or even your product market fit. That thesis is why are we going to win? Like what is it that we are providing that actually is adding real value and serving? And unfortunately when companies don't have a really good thesis, eventually they get packaged up and sold, hopefully, oftentimes beyond the preference stack and those kind of things. The second one is execution, what you were just talking about. This ability to bring that thesis to life through that rigor, through that discipline, through that good, clean communication and that clarity around, like I said, horizon planning, having good accountability to the things that we say we're going to do, that we've come together and agreed upon that, and then we go do that. And obviously, oftentimes when companies aren't executing, people start unfortunately losing jobs and things happen along those lines. And then the third one is just the macroeconomics, just what's happening in the marketplace and what it, things that maybe are somewhat out of our control. But I've seen companies that have been, had a great thesis, execution was excellent, they were going nicely, and the market shifted underneath them and they had to kind of react to that. And so something's happening in all three of those at any given time, but you got to kind of understand which one is maybe where we're having problems with this issue around execution. There's so much we can unpack there, and I'm heading somewhere with this. And a question is you did a really great job of hiring well. No one does it perfectly, but you did a really good job of hiring well. So you had people that it wasn't that we do it just came up with this incredible idea and there was nothing you could do to ever mess it up. you know I mean, you had to execute on that, is to your point, and it took the people that you had around you and the teams that you built along the way. How did you think about that when it came to how you went about hiring, how you went about holding people accountable? Sometimes people maybe the company was growing quicker than maybe their ability, their skills, but it all came back to the service of executing. Kind of a big question there, but I'll let you kind of unpack that a little bit if you would.
Yeah, no, I think, well, like you say, I think hiring a great team. The three things I had is sort of like how companies are successful as startups. The right strategy, the right team, and superior execution, right?
Hmm.
And in market is an issue, maybe rolled up in strategy, but also in security. It never really goes away.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like crunch all you want. The attackers always make more. So
uh-huh,
thankfully, in cybersecurity, market demand is never really that much of an issue. Um,
yeah,
but but I think when it comes to team, part of it is when I said, well, that is one of the challenges in cybersecurity is that it's a very incestuous sort of industry in this way because of that. Because of these
uh-huh,
companies, it's a little bit rinse and repeat. You see a lot of you know sort of the same ideas circulating the industry. And it's a real problem for customers because they don't feel like they often are they're on this sort of hamster wheel of pain right when it comes to security,
yeah,
always having to buy some new attack comes out, they need to buy some new product, there's always a new vendor for it, and they just rinse and
yeah.
repeat, um, versus actually solving the problem. But our approach, our intent was to think about this somewhat differently, that we wanted security to be a kind of thing that if ultimately we're successful with our business, we would shrink the market. You know?
Yeah,
That the market grown to 1,200 vendors and so forth, and 100 plus, you just even in my category. And that's just nuts. You're playing sort
uh-huh,
of whack-a-mole, and our industry would always justify it as being defense in depth, and what it really was, expense in depth. Customers just
yeah,
having to buy all this new stuff. Um, and so we thought about the team, we thought about the strategy we were applying toward what we intended to do, which was we wanted to clean up this industry by making security easy and effective, which is something that no one's ever really said about security prior.
uh-huh,
Um, and it was kind of an application of design,
mhm,
and design engineering, design thinking to this domain. Because for the longest time, people always said, "Oh, security is about saying no, and design is about saying yes," and these are sort of diametrically opposed. You cannot
uh-huh,
make things more usable and make them more secure. It's sort of one or the other. But we that was sort of the contrarian insight we had, frankly,
yeah.
that no, actually, the best security is a security that will happen by default because we've designed the right thing to happen. Um,
And I
and
think
so,
that speaks to the thesis part of what I was talking about for sure. I
mhm,
mean, that gets to the heart of what I was talking about, that thesis of why are we going to win? Because it is that kind of, doesn't have to be contrarian to be a thesis, but it was that way of thinking that kind of served you, and it really pointed all your resources, how you hired, how you deployed capital, really everything was in service to that to some degree.
yeah. And so, we came to hiring, leaders, and I do think whether in life or in business, almost all problems in this world are solved through leaders, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, or sometimes created, but
yeah, yeah, definitely
or
that too.
disproportionately. But I think with the leaders that we're seeking, and I was very fortunate to be able to hire with my company other founders, right? Folks who had
Mhm.
started their own companies, and so they were used to, taking much more responsibility beyond their respective function or domain,
Uh,
and being really thoughtful about how to integrate,
yeah.
sort of their ideas and thinking with other folks. And so that's one thing we look for, at every stage, right, of the business, even much later. We were looking for entrepreneurial leadership, the kind of folks again who execute without all the resources needed,
Uh-huh.
could demonstrate where they had come up with different ideas for
Mhm.
problems that they had tackled or solved in their career. How they'd also sourced and sought out different kind of talent
Mhm.
that they drew from, right, uh, to enable that. And ultimately, that's how we end up with like a primarily Zendesk sort of
Uh-huh.
originated go-to-market motion or team because that was our motion. Our motion
Yeah.
ended up looking like a very low ASP, but very high velocity and high volume inside sales motion early. And when we were pattern matching, by the time we were get to about 10 million, I was like, okay, we were just shy of 10 million in ARR. I was like, what else looks like that in this, oops, in
Uh,
this industry?
uh-huh.
And there was nobody doing that in security, but there are
Uh-huh.
plenty of people doing it in SaaS and in tech more generally. And it turns out, through one of our investors, we had a nice introduction to the former COO of Zendesk, Zach Larker became my COO for a
Yep.
couple years, and I went after his former head of North American sales and his former marketing
Yeah.
leader, and
Uh-huh.
um, tried to get Zach on board, but managed to hire these guys first. Zach was like, "Well, I'm not going to recruit them for you. Let me see how you do." He was just an advisor at the time,
Yeah.
and was trying actually to be retired, but I got his people, and he's like, "Okay, if you're going to pull the band back together, I can't just sit by." And so, um,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, it was sort of with a strategic goal of really uh, developing that that motion for our business and accelerating it, um, and then hopefully going beyond that, right, with the kind of things that we do. And but yeah, and at the end of the day, we did lean on our investors for help with those recruiting efforts, sometimes in sourcing, but always in evaluating and then ultimately helping to convince these folks, right, that of all
Uh-huh.
the options in the world they could be pursuing, that Duo was one that, with their money they were backing, and that they would, be excited to have them join us for the ride. So that's another way that, again, smart money can actually help, beyond
Yeah.
just the money.
Yeah, that's really good. And that's again another thing. That's what Mitchell said is he was saying it's about being able to help people attract the right people at the end of the day. I mean
Mhm.
that's where they've kind of it's part of their thesis, and part of what how they kind of help provide value to the people that they partner with. And along those lines, one of the things I want people to hear, and correct me if this is wrong, if I'm hearing this incorrectly, is you don't want to spend IQ points solving problems that have been solved other places. You want to spend on innovating, like I said, thinking about how to do that in that contrarian way. And one of the ways you did that was thinking about, who are the people that can help me that have kind of have done this before, and how can I bring people that maybe have a behavioral makeup, like those people that have been founders that have had to that are standing on real scars of like, I have to do more with less, and I know how to integrate it, and so they're behaviorally are ready to be in that kind of environment. I don't know if that was something you intentionally thought through, or if it was something you're looking back on, you're saying that's what we did.
Yeah, yeah, we had a lot of focus, our recruiting on behavioral interviewing, trying to understand if, there's a couple kind of criteria we always had. If people were self-aware, it's kind of really critical for us, because if you weren't, you really couldn't receive feedback, you couldn't be coached. And so, um, and the worst experience I've ever had in my professional career have been from folks who just had no sense of themselves, or the impact, sometimes negative, they had on other
Yeah,
people. And
yeah,
so that's really critical. But also when it came to, things like fundraising, I had a similar kind of, bent and criteria around the strategic investors as well. Certainly, Lori's, grocery store test is one way to kind of capture that. But, the other for me, the kind of elements of that behavioral profile were, are these investors accessible and really responsive? If I text them, are they going to text me back?
yeah,
Um,
uh,
and because, when you need your investor or board member, I mean, there's a reason, right? You're
yeah,
reaching out
yeah,
to them. It's not just the
uh,
talk. And
yeah,
so they have to be available and accessible and, empathetic with you, right? To be able to do that. They should also be oriented to help, not to judge, I think. They can judge all they want, right, during the diligence and,
yeah,
the process. But beyond that, in your board meetings, they're not there to sit back and just, you know, poke at you. They need to be there. It's a team, just like any other
yeah,
team that you'll manage, and your board, constructively. There are things that they actually can do to help, although there are really limits, and there should really be constraints around that, which we'll talk about too, I guess,
yeah,
because I also
yeah,
see founders get screwed up about what they think a board should be doing.
yeah. And I want
Um,
you to talk a little bit about that. So please dive into that a little bit as well, because that's one of the questions I had.
okay, yeah, yeah, I see it all the time, particularly from new founders, where they don't actually understand what their job is or what a board's job should be.
Yes.
And and I see a lot of founders. We've had unfortunate number of founders here locally that are no longer CEOs, right, of their companies. Uh, and That's happened because, one, they've sort of, sometimes early, given up too much of their power.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it's not really just about, sort of control, the super voting shares or any of that kind of stuff. It's
Yeah.
that they expect that their founders, that their investors are doing things that actually their investors expect of them. right? That,
Yes.
when founders, expect that their board can or should help, drive company strategy, um, there are limits, right? Boards are
Yes.
responsible only for three things, in my opinion. They're responsible for ensuring that the company actually has a decent strategy. Doesn't mean that they
Develop it.
yeah, they're not the authors of that, right?
Yeah.
Like you and your
Yep.
team are, the CEO and the managing team is. The point at which, you don't have better ideas than the board does.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. This is really good, Doug. Keep going. This is really helpful.
Yeah, boards can make a different decision about who should be
Uh,
CEO. So that's
uh,
one, right? The boards are responsible for ensuring that there's a good strategy for the company, but they're not. Their job isn't to make it. Um, that you have you know, a budget and the financing to enable that, right? That's
yes.
that's the board's responsibility to make sure again that the financial operation of the company supports that strategy.
Yeah.
And the third is that you have the governance in place to make sure that that money doesn't get squandered right, by the
Yes.
founders, CEOs, or anyone else. Um, but yeah, I see founders often get screwed up thinking that their investor needs to help them with this or that, or they ask them these kind of questions. I'm like, uh, there are things you can do with certain board members in private. There's also other ways to approach that, kind of thing. Like you should have maybe you need a personal board of directors, right?
Yeah.
For
Yes.
yourself and for, but
Very much so.
yeah, but don't, or your coach, but don't put that on your board. you know,
Yeah. No,
the board's gonna
this
have,
is yeah, this is really good. I mean, I've seen it. I don't know if it's a conscious decision or subconscious, but I've seen where the almost compression happens where the CEO thinks that they're going to do the things you just talked about. So like the board starts acting like the CEO. The CEO kind of acts as the VPs. The VP start, and there's this downward compression that happens because of this misunderstanding. And one of the things that I want to highlight that you're saying is good board members understand what you just said. They know that, but I've seen where some board members think that really their job is to do that.
yeah, no, those are bad investors, bad board members. The acronym I have for this is NIFO, nose in, fingers out. you know,
I like
you know,
that.
they should, as a board member now myself, it's important that you're engaged, you have, again, you're accessible, you have a good relationship, a constructive relationship with your CEO and other board members, but your job is not to meddle
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
with the company and the reach around and all this kind of thing. I was always very I made my team accessible, right, to my board, but in
Yes.
ways that were managed, right,
Yes.
where it's not just sort of a free for all. And again, it's sometimes where it gets screwed up too, where you have sort of these individual or sometimes even pet relationships between a individual as a board member, individual
Yeah.
executive, below the CEO, and it's just really, you just have to really manage things well as a team, right? Not to have the chaos of sort of having shadow sort of
Yeah.
uh, control of the company in lots of different ways you can't manage.
Yeah. Well, and we could do a whole episode on this. This is so critical and so important. I've literally seen, I'm not going to use companies' names, but you know them. We have friends in common that where an executive reached around the CEO to the board member, and the board member, allowed for that to happen, and it ended up literally toppling the business. CEO lost their job. That person actually moved into the CEO role. That person ended up losing their job, and it really, really hurt the value of the company. But more importantly, it hurt a lot of people that
Yeah.
depended upon them to be making responsible decisions, and it happens very subtly. So
Yeah. Yeah, a very common pattern is, with new money, new investor coming in, sometimes new executives that, again, the investor might help the CEO recruit or place. But then if the CEO isn't able to develop and maintain a strong relationship, right? I mean, they're
yes,
they're your executives, right? You should be managing
yes,
them, not
yes,
your board member who introduced you. But if there's this weird sort of thing that happens where there's more visibility, more transparency, more whatever, right? From that exec to that board member, then the CEO is providing to the board and all this. Um, or again, there's just not the expectation you've set kind of with your executives about how you're going to manage the board as a team, right? And you're under your control. it just gets really screwy. And I've seen plenty of CEOs end up on the outs, right, with
Yep.
maybe that new executive ending up escalating to be a new CEO, right, of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
company
Yeah.
at some point.
Well, and one of the things that you said in there is really critical, and I want to talk about communication in a number of different ways. But you're a highly effective communicator. But just setting those expectations with your executives and with your board, and kind of setting kind of the almost the rules of the road, if you will,
Mhm.
is that's something that I know that you did and thought about, and really did help in that those dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely you want to have management systems and a management culture in place, right? Certainly to manage down through your
Yeah.
organization, but also up, right, in terms
Yeah.
of your board and the rest.
Mhm.
Again, so setting sort of the expectations, not just expectations, but the protocols, right? How you're doing that and the process you have with the board to do so. Yeah, again, there's some basic elements that I personally have always sort of had with my teams on this, where a steady drumbeat of communication, like you say, with the
Uh-huh.
board, particularly early, maybe every 6 weeks, which I know sounds a lot, but that's not a board meeting, but meaning to
Yeah.
say that we would communicate our plans, progress, and problems in the form of a board report, 3 to 5
Mhm.
paragraphs per department, plus my CEO summary, but just a written document with comments enabled via document sharing like Google Docs,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
such that my board members could weigh in right on the questions or, you know, t-
Yeah.
that they saw that in the board meeting that we would focus on a couple, 2, 3 questions of strategic, right, concern, not just the weather report, right, of just reading the slides, but but again, we sent that board report ahead of every mid-quarter board call or every quarterly board meeting. So again, a cadence every 6 weeks, because again, for fast-growing small companies, right, you sort of you have a better appreciable rhythm. The cadence of the business is actually, in my point opinion, the most important thing. And I'll talk,
Yeah.
but that may be just, again, no single way to be successful, but just the way I do things, just velocity and iteration were
Uh,
sort of really critical to our success.
yeah.
But then, other aspects of the board is the construction of what those communication paths are. So I always had a lead director, even if informally, who would help me round up other conversations with board members as needed, who I could play out certain scenarios
Uh,
with before I ever took them to the board at large, who would help me understand and interpret kind of the board feedback. Because again, we always
uh-huh.
had a closed session end every board meeting, and my lead director was always the one to give me a call afterward to say, "Hey,
Yeah.
here's kind of what that meant a little bit more, and here's kind of how this other board members are thinking,
Uh-huh.
and more direct feedback than sometimes the board meeting itself would allow." And anyway, so these kind of things I think are really critical, right? Creating kind of the structured format again of that board engagement, because board members are busy, and
Yes.
so to really have them meaningfully engage and really understanding, you have to be thoughtful about, like, well, how do they hold the context of what's happening in the company in a way where they can actually be meaningfully useful in some way,
Yeah.
right, to you in discussion. Um, and so many a structured agenda and all the things that you know uh, are pretty typical. But anyway, those are the things that were a little bit atypical that I had done that were, I think, pretty effective in making sure we had a highly effective board as a team.
Yeah, and the people that are listening, I want to kind of double down on this. You use the word critical, and it's critical for a reason. Those patterns, those rhythms of communication, and as a CEO, or founder, you're always managing. You've got your team, your customers, your board. You've got these things, and you don't let them just manage themselves or let them just kind of evolve. You literally have structures and disciplines around managing those because it is critical. One of the things as a CEO or founder or an investor, obviously those rhythms of communication, but what about off pattern communications when maybe things aren't going well? A problem has come up with, a team member or a customer or something like that. What are your expectations, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, my mantra was for my team, and actually on onboarding every employee we ever had in the company was always the same. So management is the art of no surprises.
Hmm.
There are always bad things that happen, but
Yeah.
to the extent possible, we should be prepared for them. We should have had sort of been thoughtful, right, about
Mhm.
the potential for them coming up. So we're never caught on our heels. We're never sort of left scrambling. And just as you expect, I think of any of your own teammates, right? You have to lead with the same, care and conviction, but really courage. I think
Uh,
to be constructive and positive and relentless and creative in the face of things when they go wrong too. You don't want
yeah.
to be a sad sack wallowing, right? Despair, right? Like, you don't want to sugarcoat or
Yeah.
hide or pretend like it's not happening. You have to have
Yeah.
the courage to name the damn problem and then go
Yeah.
after it. And I
Yep.
think, it's, you don't want to shoot from the hip, and just
Yeah.
always be, come up with things on the fly, but you do have to be timely in this work as well. Or people learn the behavior they see, right, from you as the leader,
Exactly.
where, again, maybe you don't have all the resources and have had all the discussion and engagement you need from your team to come up with the right solutions to address a problem, right, as it happens. But you have to call out the priority with which you'll solve it. Like, no, that's
Mhm.
important because there in any growing company, there's nothing but problems, nothing but
Yeah.
problems. But
Exactly.
the things you're always tackling are these things
Uh,
coming up, and
uh,
sometimes there are things you're gonna have to let burn. Like,
yeah.
yeah, that's a thing. We get it.
Yeah.
Yes, let's talk about it. But here's the perspective, right, relative to what else is happening here, and so yeah, so
Well, I
so
think
there's
that community. Oh, go ahead.
oh, no, go on, please.
I was gonna say the communication, like I said, sometimes there's fires going on everywhere, and sometimes you've got to give that context to the board, to your team, to others. Like, I understand you're standing next to that fire, and I know that it's hot, but let me give you the context of some other fires and why that's kind of going on. And so I really appreciate you kind of highlighting that. And I want to be respectful of time here. I know we're getting close here, so I have
Mm,
a couple more questions. But one of the things that I want you to spend a little bit of time talking about is, and correct me if these aren't the exact right words, but Duo was built on a lot of things, but some of those things were simplicity, empathy, and integrity, and you kept those values intact through hyper growth and through a major acquisition. What advice would you give to founders for protecting that mission or those values while they're taking outside capital?
No, that's a great question because I think outside capital comes with all kinds of perspectives about who or what you should be and what time frame and how, right? And so it's always incumbent on you as a leader to really create for your team those sets of operating principles, values, um, the mission you're on,
Mhm.
but really the identity, right? Of again who you are, what you're doing, why, and how you're going to go after it. And so, a couple things. One is, you end up repeating yourself all the time. The one thing you have as a CEO that and a founder that others don't, because, like, quite frankly, as you know, Kirk, I used to say all the time, I'm usually the dumbest guy in the room, right? Most of the people who are in the meeting with me are all much closer to problems than I am. They're the
Uh-huh.
ones on the front lines of the business, right there with the customer or with the code or whatever that are dealing with this. And so, but what you have is a unique vantage point, a unique vantage point to see and integrate across all the end vision for how that should happen. So it's important that people understand that, and you have to
Mhm.
take seriously the work of, like you say, communications and the communications design, because that will change also over time, right? You get high quality communications by default when you're 20 people sitting around one table, but once you get beyond that, you're really having to think about how do you cascade sort of awareness, understanding, um, and create not just a one-way path to that, but two-way. Right? How are you integrating, sort of hearing from
Yes.
what's happening in the business, and really understand what that looks like, and ensuring that all of your management structure right across the business is really doing that as well, and helping to surface the best ideas wherever they should emerge. Um, but I think you know the if there's anything that was unique about Duo's sort of approach to this in particularly in security is that we really wore that on our sleeve in a way that was not just internal but extremely visible externally as well.
Yeah.
And but for me, that was, it was part of the corporate strategy, right? Not
Hmm.
just our sort of internal and operational. It's that the way we treated customers was the way we treated each other and our partners and all down the line. It was with all those same principles you discuss, right? Of trust, integrity,
Hmm.
um, and empathy. And we worked really hard, as we said, to be kind and necessary, to go out of our way, help other people be
Yes.
successful. Because in a field like security, it's just too easy, right, to do things that people don't understand what's happening and say, "Hey,
Hmm.
everything's much better," but nothing is
Uh,
happening. And
no.
again, in a market like ours, where it's very easy to be a snake oil vendor, sort of
Yeah.
lemon market, don't know whether any of the products you're selling are actually successful or not, or buying are successful or not. There is a real perverse incentive to do things that don't actually matter, right?
Yeah.
In security. But in our case, we wanted to hang that out there. And in part was not only to find for the right kind of customers to find us that were
Yeah.
looking for better, more effective, and easier security to go after and replace all this other stuff with, but also to attract the right kind of talent.
Yes.
And so we ended up being sort of inbound, not only in terms of our sales motion and the rest, but also
Mhm.
in terms of our talent acquisition. We built a brand, a real employer brand, right?
Yes, you
As
did.
as the kind of company where we would be a platform of opportunity for folks in their lives and careers for however long they would give us. And as long
Yes.
as, again, their historic of their life and career and all things they want to accomplish had a mapping, right, to the things that we needed, right? We could all grow together. And if they grew beyond
Yes.
us, that was fine. And we had, folks that did leave us and then come back to us and then leave us and then
Yeah.
come back to us and leave us and come
Uh-huh.
back. I mean, like, one of them, I think Trevor, I think one of our guys, he literally was employed by Duo 3 times.
Yeah. That's
um,
awesome.
but it's
Yeah.
great, I love that. I would much rather get the kind of people who are restless and ambitious and hungry like that, um,
Yeah.
than the folks who would just want to park themselves, right, for a
And you,
stable and whatever career.
yeah, and you guys, and you say as a CEO founder, you have this unique vantage point, but you also kind of state and restate things. And one of the things that you said in there, I want to pull out is, kinder than necessary. And the other thing was assume positive intent. Those sound like nice things. Those may be things you put on a bumper sticker, but you guys live those things. And I saw how those changed the conversations because people did assume positive intent and they were kinder. And that is something that you constantly were talking about. And your team was too. They started to reflect that. And so I think that's really important. We're getting close here to time and I want to make sure. Oh, go ahead. You're going to say something.
Well, no, I was just say, it's something I, sort of learned from you too, Kirk, is, I didn't play sports, professional sports of any kind, or I never grew up in team sports. I was always a skateboarder. So most of my experience was in sort of sport was 80% falling on my face, right? And just getting up and trying again. But I do think, there's one truth in sports and in business. And, if you go out in the field and you clip your teammate, you'll
Yeah.
all lose,
Yeah.
right? And so and
Yeah.
I just never understood how in corporate America you have over and over again this dynamic of, people just undermining each other, two
Yeah.
people, so coming to some sort of agreement and then one of them leaving saying, "Yeah, screw that guy, we're not doing that." And I
Yeah.
saw that, right, at big companies. I was like, how is any of this making sense? Like, that's not,
Exactly. Yes. Thank you for saying that out loud. Thank you. Yes. No, I agree. Well, I've got a lightning round couple questions here. I'll
yeah.
ask them fast. You can answer them fast if that's okay with you.
Mhm.
All right. So, first one is in this new era of AI, how do you think great companies, raising or using capital, and maybe it goes back to that execution where you're saying you got to look for ways for productivity, but how do you think that's changing how people are raising and deploying capital?
Okay, well, we talked about how, well, I don't know if I can enlighten you around if I can answer that very briefly,
Okay.
but I'll say this. I'll say this. I
Okay.
think money is basically oxygen, right?
Yes.
And I think whether in life or in business, capital just serves to really amplify who you already
Right.
are, whatever you're already doing. It's not like
Yeah.
it does something different for you. AI actually, I think, is not too different. I know people think it's some revolutionary thing, but
Uh-huh.
AI is just software 3.0. It's a kind of
Yep.
automation, but it is a kind of cognitive acceleration, right?
Yes.
But you have to already understand, again, what questions to ask and have the kind of creative impatience to seek better answers. right? Because I think, again, those best founders, they're the ones who are relentlessly creative and generative of ideas with or without
Yeah.
AI. But
Yeah.
you have to have that mindset to make the most of either financial capital or this additional, operational or cognitive ability, whether it's human or digital. And so, and again, I'll give you an example concretely. I did see, I met an investor in a fintech company who had the wildest story about a founder, CEO, who he couldn't manage a way out of a paper bag. I mean, frankly, he had a team, he lost it all, it was really horrific. And, the company was about to tank and implode, couldn't manage a proper leadership team. But now is managing nearly 200 million in customer assets,
Wow.
with a set of AI agents who replaced sales, marketing, CS, all
Oh
this.
man.
It's a
Yeah.
technical CEO, as you probably
Yeah.
glean,
Yeah.
but it's because his product, what it does is algorithmic treasury management. And so you
Yes.
don't need a lot of explaining. You can, those kind of products, you can simply show, not tell how effective it is from simulation. Right, here's
Yeah.
what we would have done with your treasury assets, but it's still a remarkable result. And so, I do think, there is a force multiplier that, some of the AI capability can provide in the way that, capital can. You could just, it's a scaling of again, a kind of a cognitive or operational ability, whether it's humans or whether it's
Yeah.
machines.
Uh-huh.
But again, it gets down to, is it as a founder or CEO, do you know what to do with that? Do you have the right
Yes.
mindset again to make the most of that? Um, and not just be left wondering, well, what do I do with this, all this AI sort of
Uh,
capacity,
yeah.
or what do I do with all this capital, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it'll provide knowledge, but it won't provide wisdom. It'll answer the questions you're asking, but not the ones you should have asked. That.
Yeah, but also the case, for me, I'll just say I'm not. I was never the smartest CEO. I think, well, I used to say my only strategy at Duo really ultimately was iteration. Like I
Uh-huh.
say, I'm not one of those people smart enough to have all these answers without trying,
Uh-huh.
or learning by doing. Right, I'm a skateboarder, and 80% of my skateboarding was just failing with intention. Right, just like,
Yeah, I remember when you broke your arm from skateboarding.
yeah, yeah, before a company holiday party, yeah.
Yeah,
In our parking lot.
yeah.
But there was a famous skateboarder, not as Copus, one of my favorites, who once said, "You don't really know how to do something until you can do it fast." And so I really believe, like, skateboarding, one thing it did for me was it set my clock speed to kind of
Yeah.
hyperdrive, and that having the ultra fast reaction time, and then maybe the confidence to go, play in traffic. I mean, that's basically
Yeah.
startups, right? It's more like you're just trying to
Oh,
control the chaos of, like, fighting in the
yeah.
streets or something, than any
Yeah.
sort of, like, rehearsed or choreographed, sort
Yeah.
of martial arts or combat in a ring.
Yeah.
Um, and
That's
so,
so true. That is a great analogy.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so again, I think capital gives you more turns at bat. AI maybe has the ability to give you that faster, but you still have to be the kind of founder who is just going to be relentless in the pursuit of those answers and identifying and, figuring
Mhm.
out, okay, of all these things I got to solve for, like, what do I need to go after, and how do I pull a team to go after together?
Mhm. Okay. Do you have a couple more minutes just to hit a couple more lightning round, or do you need to?
Oh yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
so I'll go quick. Best piece of advice you've ever received about raising capital.
Ooh, best piece of advice on raising capital. Uh, Only do it if you need the money,
Mm.
because again, I think, um, yeah, there's been, prior, there's just a lot of folks who raise without thinking or thinking things to do. But again, you have a plan for the money, and go after it with intention.
Yeah, that horizon planning that you were talking about. Most underrated quality in a founder or CEO that predicts their long-term success.
Uh, the kind of relentless determination. Uh, yeah, relentless determination, or maybe here we call it grit, right? But
Uh-huh.
it's a very Detroit
Uh-huh.
kind of thing. People who stick it out, like, again, these Lions fans, half of Detroit
Yeah,
they should all be founders, because, to be
that's
a
true.
Lions fan for up until recently, you had to,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
but I do think there's something real um, about that, because most of startup success early is just survival. Can you
Mhm.
survive long enough to
Uh-huh.
basically figure out the answers to all the problems that will otherwise kill you? Um, and so, so that sort of determination, not giving up, is really important. And so I look for that. I look
Yeah.
for distance traveled in founders I write first checks to, even if they've
Mhm.
done nothing else with
Uh-huh.
their in their lives in terms of a startup career. Have they accomplished anything? Have they a weight loss regime,
Yeah.
a training program, developing a
Uh-huh.
skill or mastery in some area? Like, but you have to have that sort of determination.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I know you do invest in a lot of founders and pour into them. And so this question is something I'm sure you get to share often. If you could tell your younger founder self one sentence, what would it be?
Yeah. Uh, this is something that my friend Ian Rogers once told me. When faced with two choices in life, do what makes for the better story. I think
Mhm.
sometimes, particularly here, we sort of our ambitions in the Midwest get tamped down by folks who counsel us not to sort of dream bigger and so forth.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean, and I understand the intent. People don't want people to get in trouble chasing kind of ghosts or doing crazy
Yeah.
wild goose chases. But I think you have to have both. You have to have a enough of a broad vision and a vision of a world that needs to exist, that is your contribution, right? That the world in some way is different before and after what you'll do. Um, it's just the steps you'll take to get there might have to be more measured and piecemeal, right? Step by
Yeah.
like no one goes and wins a Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
From just being
Yeah.
on the JV team. You got there's a path, right? You got to work toward it, but you got to dream big. You have to have enough
Yeah.
of that dream. But sometimes that means you take those bigger leaps when needed, and you have the courage to do so, and you develop the skills, right, to try, such that failure becomes something much less scary to you and something much more constructive for you to work with.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Where failure becomes more constructive. I really like that. Just a couple more here. Um, so you talked earlier about having your own personal board. You've worked with coaches. You and I have had a chance to work together. What role does coaching or that board play in your success, and what should leaders look for in a great board? Personal board member, coach, mentor, whatever. Call that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the board is effectively your boss as a CEO and founder, but they're not your coach. The coach is there to help you. Uh, and everyone needs a coach in one form or another, because you need the feedback, and because your board isn't that. They'll give you feedback of a kind, but not what you need to effectively manage the board or your team. And so seek
What
that
should
out.
somebody look for in a good coach? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, empathy is sort of a first thing. They have to be for you, as you say,
Yeah.
right? And you by turn should be a for you kind of leader, right? But the other is someone who is, again, able to constructively provide you sort of the feedback, ask the kind of questions that surface the kind of, you know, issues that are uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can't get at that, you'll never really um, get beyond those
Yeah.
things that you hold you back that you don't even know are.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's a real I don't know what it is you call it, but it's an incisive and sort of determined sort of like five whys style kind of kaizen. So like let's get down to the root of sort of what's
Uh,
going on here. Let's try to understand what that really is, and it's not easy to do that, right? Yourself or even with any random person, you sort of have to have someone you trust, right?
yeah.
And to be able to do that.
Yeah. Build those continuous trust. Last one. What's something most people who know you, like even friends or colleagues, might be surprised to learn about you?
Uh, well, you know, it is, and this is kind of again the paradox of leadership. I think I'm probably what you would call a reluctant leader, right? Like so
Mm.
now being almost 3 years out of my company, right at Cisco, uh, I have a small team. In fact, I just onboarding someone new today from my family office, but it's a very small team, and quite frankly, you know, I I never wanted to be a founder or CEO. It was
Mm.
never really what I had intended. And so, but I do think sometimes the best leaders are sort of the reluctant ones, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I certainly saw it. It's the ones who really want it at all costs. I remember I mentioned before what story before. One of my professional colleagues knew he wanted to be a public company CEO as he says, since he was 8. And I just think that that's crazy, almost pathological.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but real leadership isn't sort of seeking that limelight or sort of status or whatever. You know it's about having the satisfaction, right, of a job well done and winning with others, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
that for me was the greatest joy of all, like getting to be part of a winning team. But you don't always have to be the star player, the you know the that the CEO.
Mhm.
I enjoy actually being part of these other teams now where I don't have to do those kind of things.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so, yeah, quite frankly, it's just funny because I think everyone expects, oh yeah, when you start the company, I'm sure that you're dying to. I'm like, yeah, yes and no, yes and no. It's because these things I think are highly situational. There's some problems I think I'm the right person to go and solve. Or I have this burning desire to do so myself. There's many others where I see someone else and their conviction and their history and experience and dedication, right, to going
Mhm.
after it. And I'm like, this is the most inspiring thing ever. And I'm on board. Like whatever you need from me, I'm going to help you get that done because I'm going to follow. I'm going to
Yeah.
follow you to the end of the earth to see that thing through because I just think it's amazing. It's amazing what you're going to do, right,
Uh,
for all of us, right, if you're successful. And so that's the joy I have now of being on the other side of it as an investor and all this. And I hope for any founders listening or any investors, that's also be your journey because that's the best kind of relationship, right? Where everyone is dreaming the same direction together and everyone's on board pulling the same direction to make it happen.
uh, well, Doug, you are truly what, what I would call is that for you leader, that person. I'm better for it, and I've gotten a chance to see how you've impacted other people's lives with how you with how you really do care about pouring into others. And so what you just shared there, I'm one of the lucky ones I've gotten to witness that firsthand. It inspires me in how I coach other CEOs to try to pattern match against that way of being truly for others and caring. Like I said, some things you're in the spot where you can make that impact, and you're in the spot sometimes where you see it in others. And I agree with you. I hope the people that are listening, investors, anybody that's taking time to learn from you today. Here's that if they didn't hear anything else. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for going over a little bit with me. I really appreciate it, Doug.
Oh, well, thank you, Kirk, and thank you also, as we say in as a skateboarding community, like for sharing the stoke,
Yes.
getting everybody
Yeah.
excited and on the path and celebrating again, what it means to be part of a community, right? Able to contribute to each other's success. So anyway, I'm so glad that I met you and work with you, and that you continue to do what you're doing, helping other founders see the kind of success that my team and I were able to enjoy.
Well, thank you, Doug.
Thank you for tuning in to the For You Leaders podcast with Kirk Dando. If this episode helped you think more clearly or act more decisively, that's good. But the journey doesn't stop there. Subscribe for more content on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or go to Kirk's website at kirkdando.com to inquire about coaching opportunities. Now think of a friend, family member, or business leader in your life. How could you help normalize their journey today? Share this podcast with them. We hope that this sparks meaningful conversations in your life and that it enables you to become the leader that you aspire to be.